The thunder cracked overhead like a whip against leather, and Sarah Collins pressed her trembling hand against her swollen belly, feeling both babies kick as if they sensed her fear coursing through her blood. She stood alone on the wooden platform of the train depot in Cheyenne, Wyoming territory, watching the last westbound locomotive disappear into the rain-soaked horizon of August 1875, carrying with it her final chance to reach her sister in California before these twins decided to enter the world. Her carpetbag sat at her feet, soaked through, and she had exactly $3.40 left to her name. No husband because he had died in a mine collapse 4 months ago, and no family within 800 miles who even knew she existed anymore. "Ma'am, you cannot stay here." The station master's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "We are closing up for the night." Sarah turned to face him, rain dripping from the brim of her bonnet, her dark hair plastered to her pale cheeks. "Please, sir, I just need somewhere dry to sit until morning. I will not be any trouble." The man's weathered face softened slightly, but he shook his head. "There is a boarding house 2 streets over. Mrs. Henderson might have a room." "I do not have enough money for a room," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The shame of speaking those words aloud made her throat tighten. She had been raised better than this. Raised in a fine house in Philadelphia with servants and silk dresses. But then she had fallen in love with Thomas Collins, a dreamer who promised her adventure and a future in the silver mines of Nevada. That future had lasted exactly 11 months before a tunnel collapse left her widowed, pregnant, and destitute. The station master shifted uncomfortably. "I am sorry, ma'am. Truly. But I have my orders." Sarah picked up her sodden bag and stepped off the platform into the muddy street. The rain had lessened to a steady drizzle, but the sky remained dark and threatening. She pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, though it did nothing to ward off the cold that seemed to seep into her very bones. Her back ached something fierce, and the babies had been more active than usual all day, which worried her. She was still 6 weeks from her due date according to the doctor back in Carson City, but she had read enough to know that twins often came early. She walked slowly down the main street, her boots squelching in the mud. Cheyenne was a rough town filled with railroad workers, gamblers, and cowboys driving cattle up from Texas. Saloon music and raucous laughter spilled from several establishments, and Sarah kept her head down, trying to make herself invisible. A pregnant woman alone was an oddity, an invitation for questions and judgment she could not bear to face. The boarding house the station master had mentioned had a "no vacancy" sign hanging in the window. Sarah stood outside for a long moment, fighting back tears. She refused to cry. She had promised herself after Thomas died that she would be strong, that she would survive for her babies. But standing in the rain in a strange town with nowhere to go, that promise felt impossibly hard to keep. "You look like you could use some help." Sarah spun around, her heart hammering. A tall man stood a few feet away, his hand resting on the brim of his hat, as if he had just been about to tip it in greeting. He wore typical cowboy attire, dusty boots, worn denim pants, a leather vest over a chambray shirt, and a bandana tied loosely around his neck. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a warm hazel color that held genuine concern rather than the predatory interest she had learned to recognize and fear. "I am quite all right, thank you," she said automatically, even though they both knew it was a lie. He took a step closer, and Sarah noticed he walked with a slight limp. "Ma'am, I do not mean any disrespect, but you are standing in the rain, clearly with child, and you have been staring at that no vacancy sign for near about 5 minutes now. That does not strike me as quite all right." Sarah felt her carefully maintained composure begin to crack. "I missed my train. I have nowhere to stay. But I will figure something out. I always do." The cowboy studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "My name is James Thornton. I work at the Double R Ranch about 10 miles north of here. The owner, Mrs. Rebecca Hartwell, she is a widow herself. She runs the ranch with her 2 sons, and she has a kind heart. She might have work for you and a place to stay." "I am nearly 8 months pregnant with twins," Sarah said bluntly. "I cannot work on a ranch." "Mrs. Hartwell has been looking for someone to help with cooking and mending. Light work, nothing that would harm you or the babies. James shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable but determined. Look, I know you have no reason to trust me. I am a stranger. But I give you my word as an honest man that I'm offering help, nothing more. Sarah looked into his eyes and made a decision born of desperation and something else, an instinct that told her this man was telling the truth. Why would you help me? You do not even know me. My mother died giving birth to my youngest brother when I was 12 years old, James said quietly. She was alone because my father was away on business. The midwife did not make it in time. I found them both the next morning. He cleared his throat, the memory clearly painful even after what must have been many years. I swore that day I would never turn my back on a woman in need, so that is why. Tears finally spilled down Sarah's cheeks, mixing with the rain. My name is Sarah Collins. I am a widow. My husband died 4 months ago in Nevada. I was trying to reach my sister in California, but I ran out of money. I am terrified that I will die alone like your mother did, and my babies will have no one. James closed the distance between them and gently took her carpet bag from her trembling hand. You will not die alone, Mrs. Collins. I give you my word. Now come on, let us get you somewhere warm and dry. I have a room at the hotel down the street. You can have it for the night. I will sleep in the stable with my horse. In the morning, we will ride out to the Double R, and I will introduce you to Mrs. Hartwell. I cannot take your room, Sarah protested weakly. Yes, you can and you will. James's tone was firm but not unkind. When is the last time you ate a proper meal? Sarah could not remember. Yesterday? The day before? Time had become a blur of worry and exhaustion. James seemed to read the answer in her face. The hotel dining room serves a decent stew. You will eat, rest, and in the morning things will look better. That is a promise. The hotel room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the muddy street. True to his word, James had ordered her a large bowl of beef stew, fresh bread, and hot coffee before disappearing to the stable. Sarah ate slowly, savoring every bite, feeling strength seep back into her body. Afterward, she washed as best she could with the basin of warm water the hotel keeper's wife had brought up, then climbed into bed still wearing her chemise and petticoat because her nightgown was somewhere in the bottom of her damp carpet bag, and she was too exhausted to search for it. Sleep claimed her almost instantly, deep and dreamless, the first real rest she had experienced in weeks. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of someone knocking gently on her door. Mrs. Collins, it is James Thornton. I brought breakfast if you're awake. Sarah sat up slowly, her body stiff and sore. One moment, please. She wrapped herself in the thin blanket from the bed and opened the door just wide enough to peek out. James stood in the hallway holding a tray with toast, eggs, and what looked like fresh milk. I thought you might be hungry, he said, carefully keeping his eyes averted from her state of undress. I will leave this here and wait downstairs. Take your time. There is no rush. An hour later, Sarah had eaten, dressed in her only other gown that was not completely soaked, and repacked her bag. She found James waiting in the hotel lobby, his hat in his hands, looking nervous. When he saw her, he stood immediately. How are you feeling this morning? He asked. Much better, thank you. I cannot express how grateful I am for your kindness, Mr. Thornton. James, please. And you do not need to thank me. He gestured toward the door. My horse and wagon are outside. The ride to the ranch will take about an hour. Are you up for the journey? Sarah nodded. In truth, her back still ached, and the baby seemed determined to use her ribs as boxing practice, but she had no other options. She could not stay in Cheyenne with no money and no prospects. The wagon was sturdy, and James had thoughtfully placed several blankets on the seat to cushion the ride. He helped her up with a gentle hand on her elbow, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding, plodded forward with patient determination. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the morning sun burning off the last of the rain clouds. The Wyoming landscape stretched out around them, endless rolling grassland dotted with sagebrush and the occasional stand of cottonwood trees. In the distance, the mountains rose up like ancient sentinels, their peaks still capped with snow even in late summer. "How long have you worked at the Double R?" Sarah asked finally, wanting to know more about the man who had saved her from a cold night on the streets. "Near about 5 years now. I came up from Texas with a cattle drive and decided to stay. Mrs. Hartwell needed experienced hands, and I needed a place that felt like home. It has been a good fit." James kept his eyes on the road as he spoke. "She is a fair boss, treats her workers with respect. Her sons are good men, though the younger one can be a bit hot-headed. They will not bother you, if that is what you are worried about." "I am more worried about being a burden," Sarah admitted. "I truly do not know how much help I can be in my condition. You let Mrs. Hartwell be the judge of that. But I'm telling you, she needs help in the house. Her last housekeeper ran off with a traveling salesman about 2 months ago, and the poor woman has been trying to manage cooking for a dozen ranch hands while also keeping the books and managing the business side of things. She is stretched thin." Sarah nodded, feeling a small spark of hope. If she could work for her keep, at least until the babies came, that would give her time to figure out what to do next. Maybe she could even save enough money to continue on to California in a few months. "Can I ask you something?" James said after another stretch of silence. "Of course." "Your sister in California, does she know about your situation?" Sarah bit her lip. "I wrote to her after Thomas died, but I have not heard back. The mail service is unreliable, and I have been moving around quite a bit. She might have replied to one of my previous addresses, or she might not have received my letter at all. I do not even know if she's still living in Sacramento or if she has moved." "So you were traveling all the way to California on the hope that she might be there?" "I know how it sounds," Sarah said quietly, "foolish and desperate. But she is the only family I have left. Our parents died of fever 3 years ago. I had nowhere else to turn." James was quiet for a moment, then said, "It does not sound foolish. It sounds like you are doing whatever you can to survive and protect your children. That takes courage." The simple validation brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. She had felt nothing but shame and fear for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone see her struggle as strength rather than weakness. The Double R Ranch appeared on the horizon about an hour after they left Cheyenne, just as James had promised. It was more impressive than Sarah had expected. A large main house with a wraparound porch, several barns and outbuildings, and extensive corrals where horses grazed peacefully. Everything looked well-maintained and prosperous. James drove the wagon right up to the main house and set the brake. "Wait here for just a moment. Let me go in and speak with Mrs. Hartwell first. Prepare her." Sarah waited nervously, watching as James disappeared inside. She could hear voices, though she could not make out the words. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few minutes, James emerged, followed by a tall, sturdy woman with graying blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a simple calico dress and an apron, and her face was lined with the kind of weathering that came from years of hard work under the Wyoming sun. "Mrs. Collins, this is Mrs. Rebecca Hartwell," James said, helping Sarah down from the wagon. Rebecca looked Sarah up and down with sharp, assessing eyes, but her expression was not unkind. "James tells me you are in need of work and a place to stay. He also tells me you are expecting twins and have no family nearby." "Yes, ma'am, that is correct." Sarah lifted her chin, determined not to appear weak, despite how vulnerable she felt. "I am a hard worker. I can cook, clean, sew, and manage household accounts. I was raised in a good home and received proper education. I understand if my condition makes me unsuitable for employment, but I promise you I will work diligently until the babies come, and I will be back on my feet as soon as possible afterward." Rebecca's stern expression softened slightly. "When are you due?" 6 weeks, according to the doctor, but I know twins can come earlier." "They usually do." Rebecca crossed her arms, thinking. "I will be honest with you, Mrs. Collins. I do need help desperately. My sons are good boys, but they cannot cook worth a damn. Pardon my language, the hands are getting tired of burnt beans and tough beef, but I will not have you working yourself into early labor on my account. So here is what I propose. You will have a room in the main house, meals provided. You will help with cooking and light household tasks only, nothing strenuous. In exchange, I will pay you a small wage, $10 a month, and when your time comes, I will send for the doctor and make sure you have everything you need. After the babies arrive, we can reassess the situation based on how you are feeling and what you need." Sarah felt dizzy with relief. "Mrs. Hartwell, I do not know what to say. That is more than generous. I am a practical woman, Mrs. Collins. I need help. You need help. It makes sense to help each other." Rebecca glanced at James, who had been standing quietly nearby. "James, help Mrs. Collins get settled in the guest room upstairs, then get back to work. Those fences in the south pasture are not going to mend themselves." "Yes, ma'am." James picked up Sarah's carpet bag and gestured toward the house. "This way." The guest room was lovely, much nicer than anywhere Sarah had stayed in months. It had a real bed with a thick mattress, a dresser, a washstand with a mirror, and lace curtains on the window that overlooked the front yard. Wildflowers in a simple vase sat on the nightstand, a touch of beauty that made Sarah's throat tighten with emotion. "Mrs. Hartwell must have put those there while I was getting you," James said, noticing Sarah's reaction to the flowers. "She acts tough, but she has a soft heart." "It is perfect," Sarah whispered. "I feel like I must be dreaming." James set her bag on the floor and turned to face her. "You are not dreaming. You are safe here, Mrs. Collins. I want you to know that. And I meant what I said last night. You will not go through this alone. I will be here checking on you, making sure you have everything you need. That is a promise." Sarah looked up at this cowboy who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she had been too afraid to speak out loud. He was not particularly handsome in the classical sense. His face was too weathered, his nose slightly crooked as if it had been broken at some point. But there was something solid and trustworthy about him that called to something deep in her soul. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why are you being so kind to me?" James was quiet for a moment, his hazel eyes searching her face. "I told you about my mother. What I did not tell you is that I have spent most of my life feeling guilty that I could not save her. I was just a boy, but that does not make the feeling go away. When I saw you standing in the rain last night, so clearly desperate and alone, it felt like I was being given a second chance. I know I cannot bring my mother back, but maybe I can help you, and maybe that will finally ease some of the weight I have been carrying all these years." Sarah reached out and touched his hand gently. "You are a good man, James Thornton. Your mother would be proud of you." His eyes grew bright with unshed tears, and he cleared his throat roughly. "I should let you rest. Come down whenever you're ready. Mrs. Hartwell will probably want to go over meal plans and such." After he left, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of the relief that was washing through her. She was safe. She had a roof over her head, food to eat, and people who were willing to help her. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she and her babies were going to survive this. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Sarah woke each morning to the sound of roosters crowing and ranch hands heading out to start their day's work. She would dress, braid her hair, and head down to the kitchen where she and Rebecca would prepare breakfast for the hands. It was simple fare: eggs, bacon, biscuits, gravy, but the men were grateful for hot, well-cooked food and never failed to thank her. James always made sure to catch her eye across the table during breakfast, giving her a small smile or a nod as if to check that she was doing all right. It was a small thing, but it made Sarah feel seen and cared for in a way she had not experienced in a very long time. After breakfast, while Rebecca handled the business of running the ranch, Sarah would work on mending clothes, preparing vegetables for the evening meal, or baking bread. Rebecca was true to her word about not letting Sarah overwork herself. Anytime Rebecca caught her standing for too long or carrying something heavy, she would scold her gently and take over the task. "Those babies are not going to benefit from you being stubborn," Rebecca would say in her no-nonsense way. "Sit down and rest." Sarah had not had a mother figure in her life since her own mother died, and she found herself growing deeply attached to Rebecca. The older woman was gruff and practical, but underneath that tough exterior was a wellspring of kindness and wisdom. In the evenings after dinner was cleaned up and the hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Sarah would often sit on the front porch with Rebecca and sometimes James if he was not too exhausted from his day's work. They would watch the sun set over the mountains and talk about everything and nothing. It was during one of these evening conversations that Sarah learned more about James's past. He was 26 years old, 3 years older than her. He had grown up on a small farm in Texas, the oldest of 5 children. After his mother died, his father had remarried quickly to a woman who had no interest in raising another woman's children. James had left home at 15 and had been working on ranches ever since, moving from place to place, never really settling down until he came to the Double R. "Do you ever see your father or siblings?" Sarah asked. James shook his head. "My father died about 5 years ago, kicked by a horse. As for my brothers and sisters, we lost touch years ago. I would not even know where to find them now. It is one of my great regrets that I did not fight harder to keep the family together after Ma died." "You were just a child yourself," Sarah said softly. "You cannot blame yourself for that." "I know. But knowing something in your head and feeling it in your heart are 2 different things." Sarah understood that better than she could express. She still felt guilty about Thomas's death, even though rationally she knew there was nothing she could have done to prevent a mining accident. But late at night, when the babies kicked and kept her awake, she would lie in bed and torture herself with what-ifs. What if she had convinced him not to go into the mine that day? What if they had never left Philadelphia? What if she had been a better wife, somehow luckier, somehow more deserving of happiness? As September turned into October, Sarah's belly grew enormous with the twins. She could no longer see her own feet, and simple tasks like bending over to pick something up became nearly impossible. The babies seemed to be constantly in motion, kicking and rolling and fighting for space. Some nights Sarah could barely sleep because they were so active. She was sitting on the porch one afternoon shelling peas for dinner when she felt a strange sensation, a tightening across her belly that made her pause. It passed after a moment and she went back to work. But then it happened again, stronger this time. Rebecca came out onto the porch carrying a basket of laundry and immediately noticed Sarah's expression. "Are you all right?" "I think so. I just felt something strange, a tightening." Rebecca set down the basket and knelt beside Sarah's chair. "How far apart are they?" "I do not know. Maybe 10 minutes?" "That sounds like it could be early labor pains. Braxton Hicks, they call them, false labor. But with twins, we need to be careful." Rebecca stood up decisively. "I am sending someone to fetch the doctor just in case, and you are going to go upstairs and rest. But I am not finished with the peas, and I need to start the bread for tomorrow, and I promised I would mend that tear in your blue dress." "Sarah," Rebecca's voice was firm, "the peas can wait, the bread can wait, the dress can wait. Your health and the health of those babies cannot wait. Now go upstairs before I have James carry you up there." As if summoned by the mention of his name, James appeared around the corner of the house, leading his horse. He took one look at Sarah's face and Rebecca's stern expression and immediately understood something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "She is having pains. Probably false labor, but I want the doctor to check her. Can you ride into town and fetch Dr. Morrison?" "I am already going." James swung up into his saddle with practiced ease. "Mrs. Collins, you do what Mrs. Hartwell tells you. I will be back with the doctor as fast as I can." He spurred his horse into a gallop and disappeared down the road in a cloud of dust. Sarah allowed Rebecca to help her upstairs and into bed. The pains continued sporadically throughout the afternoon, sometimes close together, sometimes far apart, never quite developing into a regular pattern. Dr. Morrison arrived just before dinner, a kindly older man with wire-rimmed spectacles and gentle hands. He examined Sarah thoroughly and declared that while she was indeed having contractions, she was not in active labor yet. "The babies are preparing to make their entrance into the world," he said, washing his hands in the basin Rebecca provided. "It could be today, tomorrow, or 2 weeks from now. Twins keep their own schedule. But I would recommend you stay in bed as much as possible from now on, Mrs. Collins. No more working. Just rest and let your body do what it needs to do." After the doctor left, James appeared at her bedroom door, hat in hand, looking worried. "May I come in?" "Of course." He stepped inside but stayed near the door, clearly uncomfortable being in a woman's bedroom. "How are you feeling?" "Scared," Sarah admitted. "I know women have babies every day. I know it is a natural thing. But all I can think about is what you told me about your mother, and I am terrified that something will go wrong and my babies will be left alone in the world with no one to care for them." James crossed the room and sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "Listen to me. Sarah, nothing is going to happen to you. Dr. Morrison is one of the best doctors in the territory. Mrs. Hartwell has helped deliver more babies than most midwives. And I am going to be right here doing whatever needs to be done. You are not alone. Do you hear me? You are not alone." Sarah felt tears spill down her cheeks. "But what if something does go wrong? What happens to my babies?" James took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers with surprising gentleness. "Then I will take care of them. I give you my word, Sarah, if the worst happens, which it will not, I will make sure your children are loved and cared for. They will never be alone or unwanted. I promise you that on my life." The absolute conviction in his voice broke something open inside Sarah. She had been holding herself together through sheer willpower for months, refusing to let anyone see how truly terrified she was. But here, in this moment, with this man who had shown her nothing but kindness, she finally allowed herself to fall apart. She sobbed, deep, wrenching cries that shook her whole body. James did not try to shush her or tell her everything was fine. He simply held her hand and stayed with her, his presence steady and solid, until the storm of emotion finally passed. "I am sorry," she whispered, wiping her eyes with her free hand. "Do not apologize. You have been through hell, Sarah. You are entitled to cry." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It was not pity. It was not obligation. It was something deeper, something that made her heart race despite her exhaustion and fear. "James," she started to say, but he stood up quickly, releasing her hand. "You should rest now. I will be right downstairs if you need anything at all." He backed toward the door as if afraid to stay longer. "Sleep well, Sarah." After he left, Sarah lay in the growing darkness, her hand resting on her belly, where the babies were finally settling down for the night. She thought about James's promise, thought about the way he looked at her, thought about how safe and cared for she felt whenever he was near. She was falling in love with him. The realization should have frightened her, but instead it filled her with a warmth that chased away the cold fear that had been her constant companion for so long. She did not know if he felt the same way. She did not know if it was even appropriate to have such feelings when her husband had been dead less than 6 months. But she could not deny what her heart was telling her. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of rest and waiting. Sarah spent most of her time in bed, as the doctor had ordered, reading from the small collection of books Rebecca lent her and working on knitting tiny booties and caps for the babies. Rebecca brought her meals on a tray, and they would sit together chatting while Sarah ate. James visited every evening after finishing his work. He would sit in the chair by her window, still wearing his dusty work clothes, and tell her about his day. He had a gift for storytelling, making even mundane ranch tasks sound interesting and amusing. He told her about the yearling colt that kept escaping from its pen, about the hawk that had been hunting mice in the barn, about the card game where one of the hands had accused another of cheating and they had nearly come to blows before cooler heads prevailed. Sarah looked forward to these visits more than anything. James's presence had become as essential to her as breathing. She memorized everything about him. The way he ran his hand through his dark hair when he was thinking, the slight drawl in his voice that became more pronounced when he was tired, the smile lines around his eyes that appeared when he laughed at his own stories. One evening, about 3 weeks after the false labor scare, James arrived at her door looking unusually nervous. He stood in the hallway, shifting his weight from foot to foot until Sarah finally said, "Are you going to come in or just stand there all evening?" He stepped inside and closed the door behind him, then seemed to realize that might be improper and opened it again slightly. "I need to talk to you about something important." Sarah's heart started to race. "All right?" James pulled the chair closer to her bed and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. I have been doing a lot of thinking these past weeks about you, about the babies, about what happens after they are born, and I have a proposal I want you to consider. What kind of proposal? A marriage proposal. The words came out in a rush, as if he was afraid he would lose his nerve if he did not say them quickly. I want you to marry me, Sarah. Sarah stared at him, too shocked to speak. James continued, the words tumbling out faster now. I know this is sudden. I know we have only known each other for about 6 weeks. I know you are still in mourning for your husband. But I have come to care for you deeply, Sarah, more than I thought possible. You are brave and strong and kind, and you deserve someone who will stand by you and help you raise your children. I am not a rich man. I do not have much to offer except my word that I will work hard to provide for you and protect you and love you for the rest of my life. I know the babies are not mine by blood, but I will love them as if they were. They will never want for anything if I have any say in it. I am not asking you to love me back right away. I know that kind of feeling takes time. But if you would just consider giving me a chance, giving us a chance, I promise I will spend every day trying to make you happy. Sarah's mind was reeling. This was the last thing she had expected, marriage to James. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. James, I do not know what to say. Say you will think about it at least. You do not have to give me an answer right now. His hazel eyes were earnest and hopeful. I know people will talk. I know they will say it is too soon, that it is not proper, but I do not care about what people think. I care about you. I care about making sure you and your babies have a future that is secure and happy. Do you love me? Sarah asked quietly. James met her gaze without flinching. Yes, I did not plan to. I did not even realize it was happening until it was too late to stop it. But yes, Sarah, I love you. I have probably loved you since that first night when you stood in the rain and told me you were terrified of dying alone. You were so vulnerable and so strong at the same time, and something in me just knew that you were the one I had been waiting for my whole life. Tears streamed down Sarah's face, but they were not sad tears. I love you too. I have been so afraid to admit it, even to myself. I thought it meant I was betraying Thomas's memory. I thought it was too soon, that my feelings could not be real. But they are real, James. When I think about the future, I see you in it. When I imagine my babies growing up, I picture you teaching them to ride horses and telling them stories and being the father they deserve. James stood up and crossed to the bed, kneeling beside it so he was at eye level with her. Is that a yes? Will you marry me? Yes, Sarah whispered. Yes, I will marry you. James let out a breath he must have been holding and took her hand, pressing it to his lips. I am going to make you so happy, Sarah. I swear it. You already have. They were married 3 days later in the parlor of the main house, with Rebecca serving as witness and the ranch's foreman standing up as James's best man. Dr. Morrison performed the brief ceremony as he was authorized to do by the territorial government. Sarah wore a simple pale blue dress that Rebecca had altered to fit over her enormous belly, and James wore his best shirt and a new vest he had purchased specially for the occasion. The ceremony was short and sweet, the words traditional but imbued with profound meaning given their circumstances. When Dr. Morrison pronounced them husband and wife, James cupped Sarah's face gently in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. I love you, Mrs. Thornton, he whispered against her lips. I love you too. They spent their wedding night in Sarah's room, which now belonged to both of them. James was incredibly gentle and patient, mindful of her advanced pregnancy. They lay together in the narrow bed, her back pressed against his chest, his arm draped protectively over her belly where the babies kicked and rolled. They are excited, Sarah murmured sleepily. They know they have a father now, James said. I am going to be the best father I can be to them, Sarah. They may not have my blood, but they have my heart. All of you have my heart. Sarah laced her fingers through his and felt a peace settle over her that she had not experienced in longer than she could remember. She had gone from utterly alone to having a husband who loved her, a home that felt safe, and people who cared about her. It felt like a miracle. The babies decided to make their appearance exactly 1 week after the wedding. Sarah woke in the early hours of the morning with a cramping pain that was different from the Braxton Hicks contractions she had been experiencing. These pains were deeper, more insistent, and they came in regular waves. "James," she whispered, shaking his shoulder. "James, wake up." He came awake instantly, years of ranch work having trained him to be alert at a moment's notice. "What is wrong?" "The babies are coming. I am sure of it this time." James was out of bed and pulling on his clothes before Sarah could take another breath. "I am getting Mrs. Hartwell and then riding for the doctor. You stay right here. Do not move." "I am not planning on going anywhere," Sarah said, managing a weak smile despite the pain. The next several hours were a blur of activity and pain. Rebecca took charge with calm efficiency, sending one of the hands to fetch Dr. Morrison while she helped Sarah into a clean nightgown and prepared the room. She boiled water, laid out clean towels and cloths, and spoke to Sarah in a low, soothing voice about what to expect. Dr. Morrison arrived just as Sarah's contractions were becoming unbearably intense. He examined her and declared that the first baby was in position and it was time to push. "Where is James?" Sarah gasped between contractions. "He is right outside the door," Rebecca said. "Men are not usually present for births." "I want him here. Please." He promised he would stay through everything. Rebecca went to the door and spoke briefly with James. A moment later, he entered the room looking pale but determined. He came to Sarah's side and took her hand. "I am here," he said firmly. "I am not going anywhere." The next hour was the hardest of Sarah's life. The pain was immense, overwhelming. But every time she thought she could not endure another moment, James would squeeze her hand and remind her that she was strong, that she could do this, that he believed in her. "The head is crowning," Dr. Morrison announced. "One more big push, Mrs. Thornton." Sarah bore down with every ounce of strength she had left, and suddenly there was a release of pressure and the sound of a baby crying. Dr. Morrison held up a squalling, red-faced infant. "It is a boy," he said, handing the baby to Rebecca to clean. "A boy," Sarah repeated wonderingly. "We have a son." "He is perfect," James said, his voice thick with emotion. But there was no time to rest. The second baby was coming, and this one seemed in more of a hurry than the first. Within 10 minutes of her brother's arrival, the second twin made her entrance into the world with a lusty cry that suggested she was not happy about being second. "And a girl, Doctor," Morrison said, smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Thornton. You have healthy twins." Rebecca wrapped both babies in soft blankets and brought them to Sarah. She placed one in each of Sarah's arms, and Sarah looked down at their tiny, perfect faces with a sense of awe so profound it was almost painful. "They are beautiful," James said, his voice breaking. He reached out and gently touched each baby's head, his rough hands infinitely careful. "What should we name them?" Sarah looked at her son, who had dark hair and a serious expression even in sleep. "Thomas, after their father. He deserves to be remembered." James nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thomas is a good name." "And the girl?" Sarah thought for a moment. "Grace, because that is what you have shown me, James. Grace and kindness when I needed it most." "Thomas and Grace Thornton," James said, trying out the names. I like it. I like it very much." "Doctor." Morrison finished his work and declared both Sarah and the babies healthy. "You did wonderfully, Mrs. Thornton. You should be very proud of yourself. These little ones are small but strong. With proper care, they will thrive." After the doctor left, and Rebecca went to prepare some broth for Sarah, James and Sarah were alone with their children for the first time. James sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the twins with an expression of such love and wonder that it took Sarah's breath away. "I never thought I would have this," he said quietly, "a family of my own. Children to raise and protect, a wife that I love more than my own life. I feel like the luckiest man in the world." "They are lucky too," Sarah said, "to have you as their father. Blood does not make a family, James. Love does, and you love them already. I can see it." "I do," James agreed. He reached over and carefully took baby Grace from Sarah's arms, cradling her against his chest with surprising confidence for someone who had never held a baby before. "Hello there, little one. I am your papa. I am going to take good care of you and your brother. I promise you that." Grace made a small mewling sound and nestled closer to him, her tiny hand curling around his finger. James looked at Sarah with tears streaming down his face. "She knows me," he said in wonder. "Of course she does. You have been talking to her through my belly for weeks. You have been part of this family since the beginning." The weeks following the twins' birth were exhausting but joyful. Sarah recovered slowly but steadily, and James threw himself into fatherhood with an enthusiasm that both touched and amused her. He would wake in the middle of the night to help with feedings, walking the floor with a crying baby over his shoulder and murmuring soft words of comfort. He changed diapers without complaint, sang off-key lullabies, and spent hours just watching the twins sleep as if they were the most fascinating creatures he had ever encountered. Rebecca was an invaluable help, showing Sarah and James the tricks she had learned raising her own boys. She taught Sarah how to nurse both babies at once, how to swaddle them so they felt secure, how to tell the difference between a hungry cry and a tired cry. She also made sure Sarah got enough rest, often shooing James and the babies out of the room so Sarah could nap. "You are no good to anyone if you wear yourself out," Rebecca would say firmly. "Those babies need a healthy mother." By the time the twins were 2 months old and winter was settling over Wyoming in earnest, Sarah felt like she had finally found her footing in this new life. The babies were thriving, growing bigger and more alert every day. Thomas had James's serious eyes and a calm temperament, while Grace was more spirited, quick to smile, but also quick to let everyone know when she was displeased about something. One evening in late December, after the babies were finally asleep in the cradle James had built for them, Sarah and James sat together by the fireplace in their room. Snow was falling outside, turning the world into a pristine white landscape. James had his arm around Sarah's shoulders, and she leaned against him, feeling content and safe. "I have been thinking," James said, "about the future, about what we want for our family." "What have you been thinking?" Sarah asked when "I have saved up some money over the years. Not a lot, but enough to maybe purchase a small piece of land. I would like to start our own ranch eventually, something we can build together and pass down to Thomas and Grace someday. It would be hard work, and it would take years to establish ourselves, but I think we could do it." Sarah turned to look at him. "You want to leave the Double R?" "Not right away. Mrs. Hartwell has been good to us, and I would not leave her in the lurch. But in a year or two, once the babies are older and we have saved more money, I think we should consider it. I want to build something that is ours, Sarah. A legacy for our children." Sarah felt a thrill of excitement at the idea. "I think that sounds wonderful. We could have a small ranch, maybe raise horses. I always loved horses when I was growing up." "Horses it is then," James said, kissing the top of her head. "We will build a life together. You and me, a good life full of love and hard work and laughter. That is all I have ever wanted." "It is all I have ever wanted, too," Sarah said. "I thought I had lost my chance at happiness when Thomas died. I thought I was going to end up alone and desperate with my children growing up without a father. But then you found me in that rain, and you saved me." "We saved each other," James corrected gently. "I was just drifting through life before you came along, Sarah. I did not even realize how empty my existence was until I had you and the babies to fill it. You gave me purpose. You gave me a reason to build something that matters." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire crackle and listening to the soft sounds of their children breathing in sleep. Sarah thought about how far she had come in just a few short months. From a terrified widow standing in the rain with nowhere to go, to a wife and mother with a home and a husband who loved her. It felt like a dream, but it was beautifully, wonderfully real, True to his word, James continued working at the Double R for another year and a half while saving every penny he could. During that time, the twins grew from helpless infants into active toddlers who kept their parents running from morning until night. Thomas was walking by 10 months, and Grace followed shortly after, never content to let her brother do anything without her. Sarah returned to helping with the cooking and household tasks once the babies were older, and she discovered that she was good at managing the ranch accounts. Rebecca, recognizing her talent, gradually turned over more of the bookkeeping responsibilities to Sarah, which allowed Sarah to earn additional money to add to their savings. In the spring of 1877, James found the perfect piece of land about 15 miles from the Double R. It was 200 acres with a small creek running through it, good grazing land, and a stand of timber that could be used for building. The owner was an older man who wanted to move back east to be near his daughter, and he was willing to sell at a reasonable price. James and Sarah sat up late into the night going over their finances, making sure they could afford it. In the end, they decided to take the risk. They purchased the land with their savings and a small loan from Rebecca, who insisted on investing in their future. "You are like family to me," Rebecca said when they tried to protest. "I want to see you succeed. Besides, I know you will pay me back. You are two of the most hard-working, honest people I have ever met." Moving onto their own land was both thrilling and terrifying. They lived in a tent at first while James and several ranch hands he hired for the job built a small cabin. It was not fancy, just 2 rooms, but it was sturdy and weatherproof, and it was theirs. Sarah planted a vegetable garden and started a small chicken coop. James built corrals and began the slow process of acquiring horses to breed and train. The work was backbreaking and endless, but they tackled it together, and at night, exhausted but happy, they would collapse into bed and hold each other, dreaming of the future they were building. The twins adapted to ranch life with enthusiasm. Thomas loved following James around, trying to help with chores even though he was still too small to be much assistance. Grace was fascinated by the animals, especially the horses, and would stand at the corral fence for hours watching them. "She has your love of horses," James observed one day, watching their daughter try to coax a young mare to come closer. "She has your determination," Sarah replied. "She will not give up until that horse comes to her." They were right. Grace grew up to be an exceptional horsewoman with a natural gift for gentling even the most spirited animals. Thomas was more interested in the business side of ranching, showing an early aptitude for numbers and planning that reminded Sarah of herself. Over the next several years, the Thornton Ranch grew slowly but steadily. James's reputation as a fair dealer and a talented horse trainer spread throughout the territory, and they began to receive orders from as far away as Montana and Colorado. Sarah managed the accounts with skill, making sure they never overextended themselves, but also never missed an opportunity for smart growth. In the spring of 1879, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. The news filled both her and James with joy, though there was also a hint of fear given how difficult her first pregnancy had been, but this time everything went smoothly. Sarah was healthy and strong, and when she went into labor on a crisp October morning, she delivered a healthy baby boy after only a few hours of labor. They named him William, after James's father, a gesture of reconciliation with the past. William was a happy, easygoing baby who rarely cried and seemed content just to observe the world around him with curious dark eyes. Thomas and Grace, now 4 years old, were entranced with their new baby brother. They would sit beside his cradle for hours, entertaining him with stories and songs they made up on the spot. Watching the 3 of them together, Sarah felt her heart swell with gratitude for the life she had been given. 2 years later, their family grew again with the birth of a daughter they named Elizabeth. She arrived during a snowstorm in February, making her entrance into the world with a loud cry that seemed to announce she would not be ignored. Elizabeth had Sarah's dark hair and James's hazel eyes, a perfect blend of both her parents. "Our family is complete," Sarah said, holding Elizabeth while her other children crowded around to see their new sister. "It is perfect," James agreed, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "Absolutely perfect." The years that followed were busy and full. The twins started school in a small schoolhouse that had been built in the growing town that had sprung up near their ranch. William and Elizabeth followed in due course. The ranch continued to prosper, and they were able to expand their land holdings and build a larger house with separate bedrooms for the children. James proved to be an incredible father, patient and loving, but also firm when necessary. He taught all the children to ride, to work hard, to treat others with respect, and to value honesty above all else. Thomas and Grace never questioned that James was their father in every way that mattered. They had no memory of the man whose blood they shared, but they had a lifetime of memories with the man who had chosen to love them. Sarah often thought about that rainy night in Cheyenne when she had stood alone and terrified, certain that she and her babies were doomed. It seemed like a lifetime ago, like it had happened to a different person. That frightened widow had been transformed into a confident ranch wife and mother. And it was all because of the cowboy who had promised to stay through everything and had kept that promise every single day since. On their 10th wedding anniversary, James surprised Sarah with a gift. He led her out to the barn where a beautiful chestnut mare stood in one of the stalls, already saddled. "She is yours," James said. "I have been training her for months. She is gentle but spirited, perfect for you." Sarah ran her hand along the mare's neck, feeling tears prick her eyes. "She is beautiful. What is her name?" "I thought you should name her." Sarah thought for a moment, then smiled. "Grace. I will name her Grace, after our daughter and after the grace that brought us together." James pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply. "I love you, Sarah Thornton, more today than the day I married you, and I will love you even more tomorrow. You and our children are the greatest blessing of my life." "I love you too," Sarah whispered against his lips. "You saved me, James. You and your promise to stay through everything. You gave me a life I never dreamed was possible." "We saved each other," James said, echoing the words he had spoken so many years ago, "and we built something beautiful together." They stood in the barn, holding each other as the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In the house, their children were finishing their evening chores, their laughter carrying on the warm summer breeze. The horses nickered softly in their stalls, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, a wild sound that spoke of freedom and survival. Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here, all the fear and pain and desperation, but she also thought about the joy and love and family she had found. She had been pregnant with twins and terrified of dying alone, but a cowboy had promised to stay through everything, and that promise had changed both their lives forever. Years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful young man who took over much of the business management of the ranch by the time he was 18. Grace became known throughout the territory for her skill with horses, and trainers from across the West sent their most difficult animals to her. William discovered a talent for carpentry and began building beautiful furniture that Sarah sold in town. Elizabeth showed an early interest in medicine and announced at age 12 that she wanted to become a doctor, a goal that both Sarah and James supported wholeheartedly, even though it was unusual for a woman. The ranch prospered beyond what Sarah and James had dared to hope in those early days. They were able to pay back Rebecca's loan within 3 years and remained close friends with her until her death in 1885. They took in ranch hands who needed work and a place to stay, remembering their own desperate circumstances and wanting to pay forward the kindness that had been shown to them. On a warm summer evening in 1895, Sarah and James sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over their land just as they had done countless times before. They were older now, both in their 40s, with gray threading through their hair and lines etched on their faces by years of hard work and Wyoming sun. But their love for each other had only deepened with time. Thomas had married a lovely young woman from town the previous year and was building his own house on a portion of the ranch land. Grace had just announced her engagement to a cowboy from a neighboring ranch, a good man who clearly adored her. William was apprenticing with a master carpenter in Cheyenne, but came home every weekend. Elizabeth was preparing to leave for medical school back east. the first in their family to attend university. Can you believe how far we have come? Sarah asked, her hand finding James's as naturally as breathing. Sometimes I still cannot believe you agreed to marry me, James replied. A poor cowboy with nothing to offer but a promise to stay. That promise was everything, Sarah said. You kept it through labor and delivery, through sleepless nights with crying babies, through hard years when the ranch barely made enough to survive, through illnesses and accidents and all the challenges life threw at us. You never wavered, not once. I never wanted to, James said simply. Loving you and our children has been the easiest thing I've ever done. Everything else was just details. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. The sounds of the ranch surrounded them. Horses whinnying in the pasture, cattle lowing in the distance, the creak of the windmill pumping water. These were the sounds of home, of a life built with love and determination. Do you ever think about that night in Cheyenne? Sarah asked, when you found me in the rain? All the time, James admitted. I think about how easily I could have just walked past you. I was tired, it was raining, I had my own problems to worry about, but something made me stop. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was my mother watching over me, pushing me to be the man she raised me to be. Whatever it was, I am grateful for it every single day. I think about how close I came to giving up, Sarah said quietly. I was at the end of my rope that night. If you had not appeared when you did, I do not know what would have happened to me and the twins. You literally saved our lives. And you saved mine, James countered. I was just existing before you came along, Sarah, going through the motions. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to build something that would last beyond my own lifetime. You gave me a family. That is everything. The door opened behind them, and Elizabeth came out onto the porch carrying a tray with coffee and Sarah's famous apple pie. At 15, she looked so much like Sarah at that age that it sometimes took James's breath away. I thought you too might like some dessert, Elizabeth said, setting the tray on the small table between their chairs. Thank you, sweetheart, Sarah said, smiling at her youngest daughter. Are your brothers and sister already in bed? Grace and Thomas are out in the barn and checking on that mare who is about to foal. William is in his workshop. He says he will be in soon. Elizabeth hesitated, then said, Can I ask you something? Of course, James said. How did you know you were meant to be together? I mean, you got married so quickly and under such unusual circumstances. Were you ever afraid you were making a mistake? Sarah and James exchanged a glance, a whole conversation passing between them in that look. I knew from the moment I saw your father that he was a good man, Sarah said. I could see it in his eyes, in the way he spoke to me with respect even though I was at my lowest point. And in the days and weeks that followed, he proved it over and over again through his actions. He was patient and kind and steadfast. Those are the qualities that matter, Elizabeth, not how much money someone has or what they look like or where they come from. Character is what matters. As for being afraid, James added, of course I was afraid. I was terrified that I would not be able to provide for your mother and the twins, that I would let them down somehow. But I knew that not trying would have been a far worse mistake. Sometimes in life, you have to take a leap of faith. You have to trust your heart even when your head is telling you all the reasons why something might not work. Your mother and I took that leap together, and it was the best decision either of us ever made. Elizabeth nodded thoughtfully. I hope I find something like what you two have someday. You will, Sarah assured her, and when you do, you will know it. It might not happen the way you expect, but love has a way of finding us when we need it most. After Elizabeth went back inside, Sarah leaned her head on James's shoulder. We did all right, did we not, with the children? We did better than all right, James said. We raised 4 incredible human beings who are kind and smart and brave. They are going to do amazing things with their lives. We should be very proud. I am proud, Sarah said, of them and of us, and of everything we have built together. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear, Sarah thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. She had lost so much. Her parents, her first husband, her sense of security and place in the world, but she had found so much more. a love deeper and truer than she had ever imagined possible. Children who filled her life with joy and purpose, and a home that had been built on promises kept and faith in each other. She was no longer the terrified pregnant widow standing alone in the rain. She was Sarah Thornton, wife, mother, ranch owner, and partner to a man who had kept his promise to stay through everything. And as James wrapped his arm around her and pulled her close, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years continued to unfold with their mix of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. Thomas and his wife welcomed their first child in 1896, making Sarah and James grandparents for the first time. Grace married her Cowboy in a beautiful ceremony on the ranch, with wildflowers everywhere and half the territory in attendance. William opened his own carpentry business in Cheyenne and became known for his exquisite craftsmanship. Elizabeth was accepted to medical school and left for the East Coast with her parents' blessing and support, determined to become the best doctor she could be. Through it all, Sarah and James remained each other's constants. They worked side by side, managing the ranch and raising their children, always presenting a united front. They laughed together, cried together, fought occasionally, but always made up before going to bed. They held hands at dinner, stole kisses when they thought no one was watching, and fell asleep in each other's arms every night. On their 20th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party. The entire community came to celebrate the couple who had become something of a legend in the area, the pregnant widow and the cowboy who had built an empire on a promise. There was food and music and dancing, and at the end of the night, James pulled Sarah onto the makeshift dance floor for one last waltz. 20 years, he murmured as they swayed together, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. So would I, Sarah said. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, I would choose you again and again, James Thornton. They danced under the stars, surrounded by the family and community they had built, and Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. She had been given a second chance at life and love, and she had made the most of it. She had not wasted a single moment. As they grew older, Sarah and James gradually turned over more of the ranch operations to Thomas and Grace, who ran it with the same dedication and love their parents had shown. Sarah spent more time in town, helping at the school and the church, using her education and experience to benefit the community. James mentored young cowboys, teaching them not just the practical skills of ranching, but also the values of honesty, hard work, and treating people with dignity. In 1905, when they had been married for 30 years, Elizabeth returned home from medical school, fully qualified as a doctor. She set up a practice in the growing town near the ranch, becoming the first female doctor in the territory. Sarah and James attended her opening day, their faces glowing with pride. "You did it, sweetheart," James said, hugging his youngest daughter. "We always knew you would." "I could not have done it without you and Mother believing in me," Elizabeth said. "You taught me that I could be anything I wanted to be if I was willing to work for it." That evening back at the ranch, Sarah and James sat in their favorite spot on the porch. They were in their 60s now, their bodies bearing the marks of a lifetime of hard work. James's limp was more pronounced, and Sarah's hands ached with arthritis, but they were still together, still in love, still grateful for every day they had. "We have had a good life," Sarah said softly. "The best life," James agreed. "I would not change a single thing." "Not even that rainy night in Cheyenne when you took pity on a desperate pregnant widow?" James turned to look at her, his hazel eyes still as warm and loving as they'd been 30 years ago. "Especially not that night. That was the night my real life began. Everything before that was just preparation for finding you." Sarah took his weathered hand in hers, their fingers interlacing with the ease of decades of practice. "I love you, James Thornton. Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for staying through everything." "I will always stay," James said. "In this life and whatever comes after, you are my home, Sarah. You always have been, and you always will be." They sat together as the sun set over the ranch they had built, surrounded by the evidence of their love, the house, the barns, the horses grazing in the pasture, the families their children had created. They had started with nothing but a promise and a prayer, and they had built an empire of love that would last for generations. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah knew that she had been blessed beyond measure. She had been terrified of dying alone, but instead she had lived surrounded by love. The cowboy who had promised to stay had kept that promise every day for 30 years, and she knew he would keep it for as long as they both drew breath. It was more than she had ever hoped for. It was everything she had never dared to dream, and it was real, solid, and eternal as the Wyoming sky above them. Their story had begun in fear and desperation, but it had transformed into something beautiful, a testament to the power of love, faith, and promises kept. They had found each other in the darkest moment, and together they had created a light that would never be extinguished.